Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Shift. If this is your first time here, we would love it if you would scan this QR code or the one back at the welcome area. And if you fill out that Connect card, we'll send you some free Opus coffee. And make sure you check out the Meet with Joe section so you can do just that, either in person or on Zoom, so you can ask any questions you want. Easter is right around the corner, and we need your help. We're going to need greeters at the front door and at the coffee area. We're also going to need ushers to help people find seating. And our biggest ask and our biggest help is going to be parking. We're meeting with Westminster Presbyterian to figure out all that fun parking stuff, so we'll let you know more as we know more. In the meantime, though, we do know that we will need a few parking attendants, literally just a few, 2 to 3, and shuttle drivers. Shuttle drivers will be picking people up from overflow parking, which is behind the middle school, driving them up to the building, and then picking them up from the building after service and dropping them back off. Also, our shuttle drivers will have designated parking spots at the front of the building. Make sure you scan this QR code and fill out all of your information if you would like to help out. Westminster is putting on an Easter egg hunt at 10:30 a.m. on Easter morning, so feel free to come early, enjoy the Easter egg hunt, and then stay for service at 11 a.m. We're also going to have a spot where you can take really cute Easter pictures. So come join us. It's going to be a fun celebration of our freedom and healing. For all of you newcomers who may not know what we do all year, we have these cute little things called generosity jars. What we do with those generosity jars is we spend all year filling them up with loose change. When they get full, we bring them back and put all that loose change into the big jar at the back by the coffee area. And 100% of all of those donations go to feeding families during Thanksgiving. The past 2 years, we have fed just about 200 families. So make sure you go and grab your generosity jar, fill that baby up, and bring it all back and be a part of helping us feed families on Thanksgiving. Let's aim for more. And that's all for today. So let's jump into our new series, Easter Unveiled.
Then, next, you can go and show us this. But this might be the absolute weirdest one of them all that I saw. This is Belphegor. Belphegor is a Jewish prince demon of hell, and he was best known for being lazy, sitting upon a toilet throne all day, and his worshippers would offer him their excrement as a delicacy. And good morning. Welcome to Shift, right? So, we're gonna have a large online audience today. My name is Joe, lead pastor here. We're in a Lent series called Easter Unveiled, and each week we're taking a look at the cross of Jesus and we're asking, what does this mean? And last week we talked about it meaning the eternal moment of forgiveness. We talked about how it never pleased God to crush Jesus, and you can go back and watch all of that and see how we got there. But instead, we saw that God was in Jesus, reconciling all of creation back to himself through the finished work of the cross. That somehow, in some sort of metaphysical way, that Jesus took all of the disease of sin, and sin being anything that breaks community, and absorbing it, and in doing so, healing it. And we talked about how we participate in that healing, and that ultimately we can either choose to live a healed life or not. It's like looking through all of those, it's utterly fascinating to me that people would create these gods and goddesses so specifically, okay? Like Google it. I just picked 3 for the sake of time, but there are food gods, there are door hinge gods, like door frame gods, there are travel gods, sex gods, lots of sex gods. And each of these deities says something about the people that worship them, right? But the one kind of God that they all had across all civilizations, the one that they all had in common, was the supreme gods, the God that ruled over all the other gods. And very quickly, I would just like to introduce to you the supreme gods that ruled over the civilizations that ruled over ancient Israel, all right? So I've got one graphic here. So that first one is the Egyptian god Ra, the sun god. Ra shows up in history somewhere between the 20th and 25th centuries BCE. Incredibly ancient deity. He was merged with other gods a time or two, so you might have also heard him called Amun-Ra. He was believed to be the very first pharaoh. Number two, that is the Babylonian god Marduk. And Babylon features prominently in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures. He shows up as the god Bel in both Isaiah and Jeremiah in those prophets' pronouncements against the Babylonian Empire. And this is a sketch of a relief that was excavated in Nineveh in the late 1800s. And in that relief, he is depicted as slaying the chaos monster. He is well armed with all kinds of weapons. And you'll notice, I don't know if you can really see it there, but on his hand and closest to the monster, it looks like he's wearing a watch. Not sure what that's about, but he's powerful and stylish. So number three is the Persian god Ahura Mazda. And he was the creator god, bringer of both light and darkness. He was also the god of Zoroastrianism, which is what the Magi were during the birth stories of Jesus. He is imagined here sitting atop a war horse as a mighty warrior, and that's a common archetype that we begin to see throughout history. The last one, and probably the most important and easily most famous retired gods of the ancient world, the Greek god Zeus. Zeus was the king of the gods, ruled over all of the other gods on Mount Olympus. When the Romans came along, they didn't invent a new religion. They just adopted everything from the Greeks, and they just gave them new Latin names. And so Zeus becomes Jupiter. He was the god of thunder and was a terrible god, one of mighty power, and obviously to be feared. And if you look at all of these gods, there's common themes, there's common threads amongst all of them. They are powerful, they are violent, and they evoke fear. And you better toe the line, or God will hurl that thunderbolt and strike you down. This is how ancient people saw God. This was their theology of God. And I don't blame the ancient people for viewing God this way, right? This is how the world worked, right? And if the world worked this way, it must be by design. God was created in the image of humanity, and they created these idols as a way to connect with these far-off deities. However, there was one peculiar group of people that did not participate in this, and that was the nation of Israel. Now, while they were not like monotheistic in the way that we kind of like civilizations are today, the way that we know it today, and you can see Job 1, the Old Testament book, chapter 1, for their clearest picture of their understanding of the gods and something that was called the divine council. They did believe that their God, Yahweh, was above all other gods, as in the Ten Commandments, where it says, "You shall have no other gods before me." Like we interpret that, it's like, oh, don't put other things in front. No, they're literally saying all these other gods are less than our God. You shall have no other gods before me. They also didn't make idols, so we don't have any statues of what their vision of Yahweh looked like, because the second commandment forbids them from creating idols. And the Old Testament prophet Isaiah even goes so far as to say that God is a God who hides himself. They have one God, and they have no idea what this God looks like. And that is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And let me tell you why. When we create idols of the things that we worship, they tend to look like us. They look like us, they think like us, they love like us, and most importantly, and probably most dangerous, they hate like us. We superimpose our belief systems for good or ill onto these idols and use them to bless and excuse our behaviors. And this is the reason that you see people doing atrocious things in the name of God. This is why people can claim to follow God and commit horrific acts of violence toward the other. It's how America was able to explain away the genocide of the indigenous people of this land. We use terms like manifest destiny, that God had ordained this new promised land for us. And we're still seeing it today. Watch some recent speeches by MAGA politicians, and they'll use words like vermin and demon, filth, rats to describe other humans. They claim to follow God and still hate. And the author of the New Testament letter, 1 John, warned people about this long ago. Can you show that? It says this: "Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen." So if you find yourself doing these things, chances are that you have created an idol and elevated what you think to the standard of God. Beware of gods that hate the same people you do. Now, all of these ancient peoples, all of these ancient empires with this whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, and then this tiny nation of really odd people with one God, only one God, and they have no image of that God. They have no clue what that God looks like. They only have the Word, right? No image, but they have the Word, which is why John begins the Gospel of John with just an exquisite, almost poem. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. Go ahead and go to that next one, verse 14. We're going to jump down. Verse 14 says this: "So the Word became human, and he made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son." All those images of warhorse gods and thunderbolt gods, whether it's Ra or Marduk or Mazda or Zeus, they are false images of God, of divine love. They are images of humanity's lust and thirst for power, elevated to God's status and used to rule over others with an iron fist. There was no true image of divine love. There was only the Word, until the Word became flesh and blood and lived among us. And it was then that John was able to say that we could see the glory and beauty of capital L love, God. And here's why he said that. And I believe this, that Jesus Christ is no idol, that Jesus Christ is an icon. As much as certain groups try to make him an idol, he most certainly is not. Jesus is the icon of the invisible God, which is why the early church leader Paul says in Colossians 1, verse 15, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. That word image, when it says Christ is the visible image, in the Greek it literally says icon. If we want to know what God looks like or God is like, you just look to Jesus, which is completely counterintuitive. And I know it's something that we say all the time, and it just kind of like goes one ear and out the other, but those warhorse gods that we saw before, they make sense, right? They make sense to me. I mean, we may not like them, but they make sense. The strong rule over the weak. Those that wield violent power, the power to kill, rule over those that don't. That's literally every government in the world. Those make sense to me. Right? That is the system of the world. That is how, for good or ill, we have chosen to structure our society. But gods that reflect that make sense. But the God that looks, can you go ahead and show this next picture? But a God that looks like that doesn't make sense. Who would come up with a God like this? But I need you to hear me when I say this. The cross is the clearest image of the unchanging nature of God, love. And I'm convinced that this is why Paul, the early church leader, would say things like this in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 2, "For I have resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." Because I think that Paul understood this, and that's why he focused so much time and energy on the cross. Earlier in that same letter, he admits just how foolish or how utterly ridiculous this idea is, and it's verse 18. It says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved it is the power of God." I was taught growing up that this meant that non-Christians think that the cross is stupid and they're just going to go to hell. So too bad. But not us, because we're the saved ones, right? But the word perishing means to destroy or be destroyed. So maybe the idea is that those who worship the warhorse gods, the gods of thunder, the gods of the world systems, will not understand a God that looks like the cross. But for those that are being saved, and I love that phrase, being saved. Are you saved? I'm being saved. Don't rush me. It takes a while. Right? But for those being saved, dying to the ego, that life cycle of death, rebirth, and renewal, it is the power of God. But can you go back to that picture? Yeah. How can that be the power of God? That does not look like any kind of power that we understand. or at least power in the way that we can grasp it. Just a few verses down from that Corinthians passage, it says, verse 25, it says, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom." I'll wait for it. Is wiser than the wisest of human plans, and God's weakness is stronger than the greatest of human strength. Now, at first glance, that really seems like a brag, right? Like, of course, like he's got more strength in his pinky than anything that we can muster. But like, does that sound like the power of that cross God? It sounds like, it doesn't sound like this. It sounds like the warhorse God's bragging, right? It evokes fear. It sounds like there's nothing you can do about it. Try as you might, but I can just squish you like this. It sounds like it's really fear-based. And I think we don't understand it because we don't understand what Paul is truly getting at. It's the weakness of God that is power, because the weakness of God is most clearly seen in the cross. The cross is about restorative justice rather than punitive. Punishment for punishment's sake is the work of Zeus. It's cruel and evil and accomplishes nothing outside of just vengeance. The true power of the cross is found in restoring all of creation through the finished work of Christ, of the Christ. True power is rooted in love, capital L, love, which is why I say that Jesus is the icon of the invisible God. Jesus on the cross is the clearest image of God and of God's unchanging nature, love. And we see this play out again and again and again through history. Jesus creates this like archetypal person throughout history that, whether they realize it or not, begin to tap into this power of restorative cruciform love. Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony was a champion of the suffrage movement. She led nonviolent protests to give women the same rights as men. In 1872, she was arrested, tried, and convicted of voting illegally. It was the idea of an older woman suffering the indignity of handcuffs and the humiliation of being arrested that helped turn the tide that led to women getting the right to vote in 1920. Dr. King, go ahead and show that one. Dr. King's nonviolent movement for civil rights. It was a powerful weakness of the brave black men and women sitting at lunch counters, being attacked by police dogs that turned stomach and broke hearts. It was a young woman walking through a satanic mob of white moms, screaming at her for just going to school. It was the black and white freedom fighters, freedom riders being beaten and some dying. It was the weakness that was broadcast all over the world to see that created the power that shifted an entire nation. It was activist Cleve Jones who began the AIDS quilt, inviting others who had lost loved ones to join the project. Jones decided to bring the quilt to the National Mall to draw attention to the ongoing crisis and the inadequacy of the government's response. On October 11th, 1987, almost 1 million people joined the National March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. 1,920 panels were first displayed at the nation's capital to highlight the scale of the epidemic. It was seeing people mourning their loved ones from a disease that was allowed to spread simply because of bigotry that created the movement that would cause people in power to react. When Jesus calls for us to love one another as we love ourselves, to love our enemies and pray for those that persecute us, it wasn't so that we could hold hands and sing Kumbaya. He was teaching us to tap into this deep truth, this deep power of love. It was because they used their weakness in the face of overwhelming warhorse powers that the powers were shamed and then defeated. Now, of course, this is foolishness, right? To all of those who are destroying or being destroyed. Might makes right. When the only kind of power that you understand is warhorse or thunderbolt power, the cross is laughably weak. Like that image. The icon of the invisible God is foolishness to those that destroy, simply because it exposes them for who they are. That cross shines a light on all the marginalized, on all the oppressed. It gives voice to those that have none. This image is every woman burned at the stake, accused of witchcraft. This image is every black boy and black man lynched for simply being black. This image is every person who died of AIDS alone and ostracized. This image is George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe." An 80-year-old Ukrainian grandmother walking 7 hours to safety. This image is a non-binary student beaten in a bathroom. This image is an Israeli hostage terrified they will never make it home. This image is a Palestinian child starving to death. The icon of the invisible God brings light to every injustice perpetrated by thunderbolt gods. It exposes the subjugation of the powerless by those who wield war horse power, and it shames them. Now, in turn, we have to allow this icon to bring light to our inner darkness, to let it shed light to the areas where we rely on and trust in those war horse gods and thunderbolt idols. Humanity's tendency will always be to trust in war, to trust in might. Unless we are intentional, our thinking of God will always reflect this. And this is the warning found in the New Testament letter of 1 John. It says this: "Dear children, keep yourselves from idols. Keep yourselves from wrong thinking about God. When left to our own devices, we will inevitably create God in our image, and that God will think like us, love like us, and hate like us. Beware the gods that think like you do." But this is the clearest image of the unchanging nature of God: love. The icon of the invisible God. You want to know what God is like? Look at the icon. This is what God has always been like, is like, and will always be like. We didn't always know it, but we do now. This past week, I had several conversations that truly broke my heart, truly saddened me. And these conversations revolved around some current politicians and how they abuse others to structure and maintain war horse power. And what saddened me is not as benign or as small as a person being conservative versus liberal or somewhere in between. It was the blindness of these people to see the very real evil behind the words of these leaders, behind their malevolent intentions. But before his death, like right before his murder, Jesus refused to be an earthly king. Just flat out refused it. Said that his kingdom was not of earth, and if it were, his followers would be fighting. They would cause an insurrection. But he refused it because that's not where Jesus' power resides. And no matter the cost, we must resist the temptation as well. My friend and pastor Benjamin Kremer said it best. Can you show this quote? "The moment we Christians start looking for an authoritarian strongman to lead us, in the moment we stop looking for the one who leads us by washing feet, who rides a donkey instead of a war horse, and who tells his followers to put away their swords and take up their crosses instead." I'll end with this. If you want to know what it means to be Christ-like, to follow the path of Jesus, it looks like that cross. All of us, we have to lay aside our warhorse idols and leave the path that causes destruction. We got to set aside all those leaders who put their trust in the shield and the sword, learn to walk in the ways of divine love, to love God, to love ourselves, love our neighbor, and love our enemies. And what does this mean? That's the question, right? What does this mean? It is the icon of the invisible God. If you're new with us, we end each gathering with a time of reflection, and we do that to allow you the time to listen to your body and to listen to the Spirit. The band will come up and play so it's not an awkward silence. Lights will be turned down to help kind of create some intimacy, and I'll ask you a few questions to guide that process. Then I will pray, and for any that are wanting to, we will have a time where you will be able to take communion, those little cups that are in your seats. And each week we reflect on what we've heard and learned. And today, let it remind us of the true power found in the cross of the Christ, love. So the first question that I have for you today is, while you were listening to that, what came forward to you today? What stuck out to you? And why? What is that saying? Second question, where do you rely on the warhorse gods in your life? And how does it bring destruction? Why do you think it is so hard to pick up our own cross and live the way of Jesus? And like it said in the quote from Reverend Kremer, how can you begin to lay down your own sword and shield? Let's pray. God of our undoing, remake us in your image. Remake us in the image of the Christ on the cross. Show us where we still cling to violent power, where we still trust in the war horse, and give us true strength to lay down our weapons of war for the sake of love. I pray that you search me and show me all the ways I behave like Zeus rather than the Christ. I ask that you break our hearts for the other. And thank you for showing us that real power is found in sacrifice, that true power never subjugates, it only serves. And I pray for opportunities for us to tap into that deep truth and power of the cross. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear. Bring comfort to the afflicted, healing to the broken, and freedom to the chained. In your name, amen.